Hey, how's it going? Mike from LI Flies Mike, and today we're going to be going over summertime flies that you can use this season for striped bass fishing. We've had a couple of videos going over my fly box setup before, and with us now going into June and the start of the summertime season with temperatures rising all across the East Coast here, it's time to switch out some flies from the fly box, from my springtime fly box into my summertime fly box. So we're going to be going over some flies that I have in a smaller box, or some of the smaller flies, and then some of the larger flies that I'll be fishing throughout the season as well. All right, so to get started here with the smaller flies in the fly box, switching from springtime, there's a lot less bait options that are around, and it's a lot of back bay fishing, at least for me. And generally, I'll either be fishing searching flies or smaller, I guess you could say more realistic imitations or match the hatch sort of flies when it comes to imitating silver sides and things like that. Now, a lot of those flies still tie over. We haven't made a springtime fly box video because I was so busy this year with rooster fish orders, but we will be making one next year. But so we still use a lot of flies from our springtime fishing, but we're going to start mixing in a lot more crustacean type patterns like you see here for flats fishing and fishing the surf in particular, as well as some different bait fish flies that we'll be using throughout the year. So starting off, we have some shrimp flies, because during the springtime I tend to have shrimp flies with me. During the summertime, what you find in particular during certain summer nights on outgoing tide, you'll find large amounts of shrimp outflowing. I don't know if they're spawning or if there's some sort of activity going on. You'll find fish feeding on them. It can be a tricky time to try and catch fish, but it is a good idea to have some shrimp flies in your box. So I have some simple gurglers here. These are the Jack Guardside gurgler flies, and we've tied them for, cinderworm hatches, for sand eels, or all sorts of stuff. But this is a great fly. You can tie it in all sorts of colors. Very simple, a little bit of bucktail, some synthetic legs, maybe some crystal flash, and then palmer some hackle and throw your foam on there. So very simple and effective fly. A lot of times when this outflow activity is happening on an outgoing tide and these shrimp are all around, these fish are going to be boiling on the surface. So it's a good idea to have some floating shrimp flies in your arsenal. Now I always try to have some more natural imitations as well, or some, I guess you could say, flies that are inspired by salmon and steelhead fishing. So these are just this is a fly tied with squimpish hair, kind of inspired by some David Nelson flies. And this is my take on a poor man's general practitioner. So just find these like kind of soft hackle type flies are a great way to try and imitate some shrimp at the same time. And then a fly that we've covered before, but that is iconic, and rest in peace Bob Popovics. This is one of the flies that I learned early on how to tie from his book Pop Flies, but the Ultra Shrimp. And it's just a great fly. It also has some more weight to it with the epoxy. We've covered this fly on the channel if you want to see a step-by-step tutorial, for instance. But this fly is a little bit more of a match the hatch style shrimp fly. One thing to note is that even after doing some small-scale commercial silverside fishing with seine nets, doing it by hand, I've only seen a handful of shrimp that are ever around this size in person. Most shrimp species that you'll see, the grass shrimp that we have, at least here on Long Island, they don't get anywhere near this large. So this is about like the largest size that you'll find, but more often this is about the biggest you'll find. It's just something to keep in mind. So next up is a fly that we've covered before, and I've mentioned another great YouTuber on the platform, another great fly fisher and drone operator on the platform, South Fork Salt. He has some great videos on fishing with mole crabs, and I'd like to try and get some footage myself this year. Over the years, I've had pretty good success fishing in the surf around June and July. There's certain times when the mole crabs seem to be a little bit more prevalent, but even just being a kid and going to the beach, you'll see the sand crabs being washed down with the tide and rolling into the troughs. So just very basic kind of marabou-esque flies with some silly legs work very well for this, using orange or bright orange to imitate egg sacs. So I'm using some orange dumbbell eyes. And then of course we have a EP style here, again with marabou. I like having some material that kind of moves around on its own when it's in the being swept around with the in the wash. And then this is a deer hair version, which this kind of helps flip it up and has a little bit of buoyancy, but with the heavy lead eyes, it's going to have some nice action to it. So I kind of prefer the deer hair versions, but for simplicity's sake, it's nice to tie them with marabou and EP fiber at times. Kind of the Vite style crab flies that we have here on the channel. So moving to more traditional style crab flies, here's a fly that we've covered recently. This is the Diablo crab fly, which you should highly check out, from Alan, who is the author of Sight Fishing for Striped Bass, a fantastic book. And this is a soft hackle crab fly. So I like using crab flies that have some natural material that will have movement, because I'll strip the fly, let it sit, or let it fall and then let it sit on the bottom, and then this marabou is just kind of moving around the whole time. Now, we've covered the Vise crab fly before. This is a take on it. This is one of the wacky flies that we tie during live streams, but I wanted to just mention it. There are rocky areas. I have mostly sandy beaches, but on the North Shore of Long Island or up in places like Connecticut, Massachusetts, there are juvenile lobsters. So you can tie a lobster. This is more like a crayfish style fly that I'm gonna throw in freshwater. But it is something to mention that you can tie like a V-style, you can tie like a Merkin style crab or a V-tie, and then just make some makeshift claws in the back, You could probably use some silicone to make them a little bit nicer as well. Now, one thing I figured out, I was doing some commercial clamming a couple years ago. We were clamming for steamers. And while sitting there and picking clams up, I noticed seagulls hovering or sitting on the surface. And they seem to be spread out every 30 feet to maybe like 50, 80, whatever. They were spread out like, every 20 yards or something, there'd be a seagull. And what would happen is there'd be a couple seagulls that would fly up and both try and grab something. And after watching it for a while, I actually watched a seagull fly back, because we were clamming on this offshore island in Wader, so I'm in the water. I could see probably 15 feet away, a seagull land and regurgitate a juvenile fluke into a baby seagull's mouth. What I figured out is, after talking to the person I was clamming with, and just after kind of putting two and two together, really the only logical solution is something is chasing these juvenile flounder from about 10 to 12 feet off the bottom up towards the surface, and the seagulls are grabbing them. So the only logical thing is that there's probably striped bass targeting juvenile flounder or fluke and pushing them up to the surface, and what's going on is, as they're running away, the seagulls are just picking them up. So it was very interesting. This is right in the area where everyone flukes as well, so these are some kind of just makeshift fluke flies. They're very simple, again, just V-tied or Merkin style, using some marabou off the back or some feathers, and then taking some inspiration from Mark Sidoti and some of his older flies, putting some eyes on top. So again, just very simple, some dumbbell eyes. You can even put some either like liquid fusion or silicone to create a kind of a fluke body, if you will, and then have some hackle off the back. But this is something that I'm going to try and do. It's definitely a matter of finding the right location, looking for drop-offs, and look for the fluke areas where everyone fishes, and it's generally around some point around July or August that you're going to see this happening. So I'm sure it has to tie into when the juvenile fluke are a certain size at that point of the year. But it's something I wanted to mention. And last but not least, we've been experimenting with some different crabs on the stream. If you haven't, come check out our live streams. We live stream every Friday night here on YouTube and Twitch, tying some flies. And these are some flies that I've been tying for years now and have pretty good success. These are EP crab bodies. They're kind of hard to find at times. I've been trying to figure out a way to replicate them at home, so you don't need to buy them. We'll try and figure that out in the future for a video. And these are EP crab claws you can see here that are pre-made. Now, something I wanted to show you, these are ones that I made myself. So this is this is with EP fiber, which you can totally do, and then coating the ends with silicone. This is more of like a strong arm style crab claw, using chenille, tying it in knots, and then cutting it and burning the end so you get that nice tapered end to it. And using the crab bodies or felt bodies, you can actually tie everything in there and glue your eyes in, all that. I tie all of this in. Some people, they just kind of glue them in, but I make sure to tie all this stuff in as well. And last but not least, flies that I haven't played with these as much, but the concept's pretty simple. These are the Alflexo crab flies. These are actually tied with the official Easy Body as well, so shout out to Bill from Easy Body for sending me some of the nice flexible Easy Body. So we're going to be trying these out and seeing how they work on the flats. I know some of my friends love fishing these things. Now, I'm not going to cover everything. There's a bunch of poppers you can fish with. One thing I wanted to show is just I usually during the summertime, I'll fish gurglers with flatwings, and I'll fish little crease flies. These are just flies that I've fished over the years that I like fishing during the summertime because I'm fishing in the bay or around inlets and stuff around sunset when the water cools down and stuff like that, incoming tides, let's say. And these are poppers that I like fishing. Very simple and easy to tie. Now, one thing I wanted to mention here is we've covered this. There's also a lot of bluefish around. So something I'll do is I'll fish bangers, which are a classic fly, Bob's Banger. But we also tie these circle hook versions, and we run these popper heads on a tube. And that way you can switch out the tails very easily. The most important thing is that the circle hook doesn't gill hook fish. Now, I'm going to try these out for striped bass because after talking to Henry Cowan, the jig hooks in general hook fish in the corner of the mouth, and it's very important to try and minimize the amount of harm to these fish. So I think the circle hooks will work fantastic for striped bass as well because they hit these things like a freight truck. But this is rigged up for bluefish with the wire at the moment. All right, now moving to the other side of the box here, and you can see we have a variety of bait fish flies, and there's some flies that are tried and true classics, and there's some ones that we've been starting to fish with recently. Now, one fly I wanted to bring up, we'll start with the weighted flies here. Now, one fly I wanted to bring up, we're going to hopefully have him on the channel here at some point. Now that I finally have time, he actually just, I think he just went bone fishing with my buddy Zeke, but that's Henry Cowan, and he has some fantastic flies. I guess we might as well include the non-weighted versions. But these are Cowan's bait fish flies, and they have craft fur tails that are stiffened with some liquid fusion, and then we're using some slinky fiber here, but this is the proper material. This is the flash and slinky here. So these are fantastic flies. These are actually tied on jig hooks with some inspiration after seeing Henry talk about fishing with jig hooks and tying the flies that way. I had somebody order some as well. And they're fantastic flies. The flash and slinky, I will say, is a different consistency and mixture of flash to slinky than C4R fiber. So that is something to keep in mind with these Cowan's bait fish. And the other thing is the secret ingredient or key weapon in this fly is the pink, or the hot pink specifically, fluorofiber, which has a very cool, almost like color changing like quality to it as it moves. You see it goes from like purple, red, pink. So if you haven't, check out the synthetic fly tying video because we go over this material in depth. You can see how amazing it is. But yeah, these flies are awesome. This is tied on a 4-rod. You can scale them up, but we also have the Magnum bait fish from Henry, which we're going to be covering here soon, and is a great fly for the summertime as well. So these cast nice, they track straight, and they also have some weight to them, so they sink nicely. So it's the same thing with these jig hook versions as well. So continuing the weighted flies trend. Now, one thing is, obviously, Clouser minnows are fantastic. I included one here, just a classic chartreuse version, a more full dress version from one of Lefty Cray's books. But I tend to stay away from heavily weighted flies unless I'm fishing on a boat and I don't need to cast very far or work very hard. The reason being is a weighted fly is a disaster waiting to happen. If you hit a fly rod, let's say you're fishing, it's blowing 20 miles an hour, and yes, I'll be out there in 30 miles an hour. I'm crazy at times. If a weighted fly hits your fly rod, it's either going to snap it right there, or it's going to cause a fracture or crack or something, and later on when you're fighting a fish, it's going to break. So I'm very cautious with heavily weighted flies, but light dumbbell eyes I'm totally down with. And we have some kind of synthetic, Clousers here, like flash tail Clousers or half and half style. This is essentially just kind of V-tied synthetic materials, almost like a classic bunker fly or something, but just doing that sort of technique, but on a half and half with a flash tail. Same sort of deal here. These are flies that we just tied live on stream. These aren't magazine quality flies. They're just flies that we tied to fish while we were chatting and having a couple drinks. And here we have a fly that I want to fish a lot more often, especially after watching the podcast from Dan Blanton, with Dan Blanton on Masters of the Fly with Henry as well. So I took, after seeing that podcast, I wanted to tie another flash tail whistler because these flies are amazing. They have lead wire and the dumbbell or the bead chain eyes, which cause that whistle noise. One of the most important things is the Henry Cowan inspiration that I threw in there, the hot fluorofiber. So that was tying that after the Masters of the Fly podcast episode. All right, some other random flies I wanted to include in here are flies that I like fishing I don't always necessarily want to fish stripping the fly and things like that. So here's some flies that are a little bit more ideal for fishing with a floating line, swinging the flies, for instance. Just basic sort of smaller deceivers. This is a fly I took from the Albi box, but I caught a bunch of stripers on it. And it's just a basic deceiver, throwing in some different flash in here. And little flies like this, obviously things like flatwings. This is another fly we tied on a stream, just throwing my fly box. Somebody recommended some blue over chartreuse. But essentially flatwing flies are thin, sparse streamer flies that I can swing with a floating line, and most of the material is going to do the work itself. You know, ostrich herl, thin hackle, bucktail, maybe some squimpish hair, some sort of synthetic material that flows nicely, softly. Tying some like eel style flies because there's obviously sand eels around, and all of these flies you can tie them in various ways. So they could be anchovies, sand eels, you know, they could be spearing. It just depends how much material put in on there. The old, I believe is the Rhodey Witch or something. We got to make a video on this fly because there's a lot of old school flies that I want to make sure don't get lost over time. I forgot the exact name of it though. And then just kind of like a rabbit deceiver, you know what I mean? Just sort of flies with good movement, good material that are very simple to tie and that you can fish either swinging or dead drifting. And last but not least, it's not the fall yet, but it is that time where we're starting to see sand eels. Now, this is a larger variation. You can tie this in a smaller size, for instance. I tied this for the surf for the fall time. But essentially, any sort of sparse fly that can imitate a sand eel. We have this easy body tubing fly, which is great sand eel fly. This one actually has foam. That's what that pink is. I did take a marker and hit it, but that's actually foam that's running through the inside, so this is actually going to float on the surface. Great for fishing in the surf. And then tying some sparse bend back or some jiggies or something like that are great for sand eels, because we're starting to see sand eels around June. Baby sand eels that are very sparse, but they start getting larger over time. All right, now moving on to the larger flies here. So one fly that we tied and we've been covering recently, it's one fly I enjoy fishing really all year, but during the summertime it's great, is the kinky muddler. And the thing is, I've tied this in like mega versions where it's on like big 6-odds and it's got squimpish hollows and a giant head. You can tie them a little bit more traditional style. I have some leftovers here. I have some nice blue versions that were left over after the roosterfish orders. And these are great flies because you can just change up the color, you can change up the profile and shape by adding material or less. They have a great movement to them in the water. They'll kind of dart side to side as you strip them hard and stuff. Tented hackle, so that pocket in the back is going to cause this hackle to go crazy and move all over the place. So these are fantastic flies, and I highly recommend, if you don't have them in your box, you should check them out. They're also pretty durable as well because of the slinky fiber, you know what I mean? And here's a variation, for instance. At some point, hopefully we can get out to Block Island again this summer. But there were a ton of squid, for instance, being eaten. And you could just take it and scale it up into a larger version, into a squid fly, for instance. We have a video on this one as well. I'd be remiss not to mention the bucktail deceiver. This is the exact sort of fly that I fished for a very long time, you know, before making content and videos and starting to tie commercially. I was a pretty simple dude and just tying some all pink bucktail deceivers, all black, all white, and fishing these during the summertime. They have a ton of movement, they're easy to tie, and if a bluefish gets one, I'm not that worried about it. So it's kind of rare, but you can see mullet, but this fly can be adapted for all sorts of bait fish. There could be butterfish, pinfish, any sort of larger profile bait fish or medium with profile. But this is the mullet marauder that is a original fly of mine, or just based off of mixing a bunch of different flies together and throwing some Senos laser dub. Just flat wing bucktail deceiver in that Senos laser dub head. But the flat wing tail gives us some nice action, and the Senos laser dub pushes some water. Another fly that I never leave without, essentially, if I'm trying to target some fish that are on larger bait, and that is the squimpish hollows. So again, here's a circle hook version because I plan on fishing more circle hooks for striped bass this year and test them out and see how they work. And then here's a version with a little bit of Senos laser dub on the head, just to give us a little bit of a bulkier head to get some more action in the rear. These flies are durable, and it is much more cost effective to get some squimpish hair and practice your and do some hollow ties this way than try and buy a ton of expensive bucktails. That being said, there is no replacement for really good bucktail, but this is a nice alternative that doesn't cost a lot of money and gives you a really nice fishable fly that's quite durable as well. I just wanted to show these. We tied on stream. This is a kind of EP larger style fly that you could use for like roosters or whatever, or tarpon. But I do every once in a while I'll tie flies like this during the summer to imitate some larger bunker or like medium-sized bunker. Usually the bunker pods move out into the ocean, and we're going to be talking about that probably in another video, maybe for like a late time summer fishing video or a big fly video or something. But I did want to mention that every once in a while I do throw flies like this in my box. So another summertime thing here is squid. And not that I get on a lot of squid bites, but there are certain places in the country here that are well known for them, like Massachusetts and even places here in New York. There are squids that are in harbors and deep areas in the bays, so you can find them in the bay at night feeding on bait fish, and striped bass will eat them. Here's a smaller squid that we tied using some Bill's body braid. We made some mono loops and epoxied the head, you could see. So there's a lot of fun things you could do. And here is a articulated version. So we have a big articulated squid here on a larger O'Shaughnessy style hook. There's a ton of different flies you can fish for squid. There's really there's so many variations you can do in different techniques. So I highly recommend tying some squid flies. Keep it in your box for the summer just in case, because it's starting to heat up and the squid will come into the bay and feed in the harbors and stuff. So one thing I wanted to show here is this is the Paul Monahan fly that we covered, and it's got this big sort of worm style hook here going to an articulated shank, and it's got some lead wire down here as well. So I actually tied one of these up for my buddy Zeke, and last fall he ended up catching some really nice fish on this. So I haven't fished these under the bunker pods yet because we just first tied them last year, but I have a feeling this is essentially, in my opinion, this is almost an improvement on like a lot of traditional big bunker flies and things like that. It's quite easy to fish and cast, believe it or not. Even with fishing from shore, I was fishing this on a switch rod, fishing in the surf. But from a boat, if you can get on a bunker pod, this thing sinks really, really well. And it's not ridiculously heavy, but you can see this is the Gamagatu hook. This is essentially a bait hook that you put something like a sluggo or a soft plastic on. So it has the lead wire built into it. And I believe it's 1/16 of an ounce or something like that. It's quite heavy. It's actually quite heavy. But on an 11 weight rod with a heavy sinking line, you'd be surprised. It's really not that big of a difference. Even on a 10 weight, it's not that bad. My buddy Zeke was fishing them. And even, I was fishing these from shore with switch rods. So one thing I want you to maybe, try out if you are fishing, particularly from a boat, it's a little bit easier if you're not scared about whacking yourself in the head, is try out these Gamakatsu soft plastic hooks. And they'll sell these at the tackle shops, where they sell the, bass assassins and sluggos and things like that. And don't go over 1/16 of an ounce though. It's quite heavy. I believe they're 1/16. I don't think they're 1/8. This would be way too heavy. But something I wanted to mention, and I plan on catching, hopefully, a nice big striped bass on this summer. All right, well, there we go. There's a nice little simple rundown. There's so many different flies. Obviously, this is not like the end-all be-all. I'll switch out flies. I'll have a fly wallet. Sometimes I'll just bring a Ziploc bag. You can check out the channel here. We have tons of different fly tying tutorials and videos on striper fishing. So there should be a ton of inspiration for you this summer and getting out there and fishing with this water heating up. So I do plan on making a comprehensive guide on summertime fishing for striped bass. So that's going to be coming out here in the near future. It's going to take me a little bit, but finally have time to start working again. Apologies for not making a ton of videos here recently, but I was pretty much stuck inside tying roosterfish flies all day for like months and months. I'll put some photos up here on screen, but essentially hundreds of these roosterfish muddlers, and then finding out that they're not eating any sardinas, and these guys all have to go down there. So in like a week I had to tie like hundreds of ballyhoo flies. So expect a ballyhoo fly tutorial coming up soon because it's fresh on my mind. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great season out there this year. Hopefully you can escape the heat a little bit and get out there and catch some nice fish, either out on the flats, out in the surf, or wherever you're fishing this summer. Alright, well thanks for watching. My name is Mike from LI Flies Mike, and until the next video, tight lines.